Hello, welcome to This Week's Economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me today. Well, today, I first want to say, if you haven't subscribed yet to my newsletter, please go to vanceginn.substack.com and you can subscribe to that. You can also find all of this at vanceginn.com with links to all the outlets where this podcast is at, and also a lot of my other work that I do for a number of entities that are out there. So you can check that out. Maybe if I can provide some help for you, please reach out and do that as well. And so going into the weekend, we have a lot to talk about. So first, let me first say, go back and check out the Let People Prosper episode from this week. It was with John Mazzina he's the CEO for Economic Accountability, Center for Economic Accountability. Great discussion about corporate welfare, what it means, why it shouldn't be a role for government. I think you'll like it a lot. So this coming Monday on the Let People Prosper show, we'll have Daniel Turner from Power of the Future talking about the green energy agenda, how it's flawed, and other things. So be sure to check that out as well and share it with your friends and family. But let's get straight into the news today. The first thing today, right, is this is Jobs Report Friday, the first Friday of the month. So U.S. Jobs Report comes out, the employment situation summary, and it says that the total non-farm payroll employment rose by 187,000 in July, so just for the month of July. And the unemployment rate changed little at 3.5%. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported today. Job gains occurred in healthcare, social assistance, financial activities, and wholesale trade. When you look at the numbers, and you kind of start breaking some of these down a little bit, the key headline numbers, which I mentioned, was total non-farm payroll employment rose by 187,000 in July. But if you look at what was the revisions over the last 2 months, those were added up together to be revised down by 49,000. So then if you subtract that out of the 187,000 they were looking at, we're looking at 138,000 new jobs. And then when you subtract out, those government jobs, another 15,000, you're down to 123,000 net jobs that were added in the month of July that were productive jobs. And so I think that that's another thing that we want to look at each month, is to say how many productive jobs that are out there. And this indicates to me at 123,000 that we are slowing quite a bit in the productive private sector, which matches a lot of the other indicators that are out there with leading economic indicators, some of the manufacturing surveys that are out there as well. And when you start digging into some of these non-farm numbers, you can see at least month over month where some of these there were actually job losses. Like residential building construction was down 5,500, non-residential specialty trade contractors down 2.1 or 2,100. You had some manufacturing jobs that were down as well. You had food manufacturing down 3,200, 4,600 jobs down on chemical manufacturing. And then you can go through some of the other ones as well. I'll make sure to put a link to this in the show notes page. But I do think that things are slowing down there. When you look at the household survey was up for employment about 300,000, and it's up about 3 million over the last year. So there's been a lot of talk about the Biden administration, how many jobs have been added since the recession and the shutdowns and everything else of February 2020. They'll talk about 12 million or so jobs that have been added. But remember, that was from the bottom, where a lot of those jobs were actually added back during the Trump administration before Biden even came to office. If anything, the trajectory slowed, the growth rate slowed after that because of a lot of the higher regulations and taxes and spending that we've seen since then. The other key thing that I like to look at here for the jobs report is the average weekly earnings or average hourly earnings, so we can get an idea of how much people's incomes are rising. And it rose 14 cents or 0.4% to $33.74, where over the past 12 months, average hourly earnings have increased by 4.4%. So that indicates that they're growing at a pretty rapid pace, which they are. And it's also now above at least CPI inflation, which is running around 3%, still too hot, but it's above that. So we're seeing real average hourly earnings is continuing to increase over the last 2 months after declining year over year for 26 months. So that means that workers are still suffering, but there's some relief, at least temporarily, to what's going on in the economy. And so I think that's something that we'll want to continue to watch as we move forward. And so that's kind of the big news from the jobs report. I think that it was showing some weakness in the labor market, as there was only about 120,000 jobs that were added that were productive private sector jobs for that month, once you subtract out those two revisions for the prior 2 months. So that's the jobs report there. Have more to say that coming up, but hopefully this is not a trajectory. I don't want us to have job losses, but I think at some point we will see those losses continue or get stronger here soon. The other big thing that happened though this week was the Fitch downgrade. I was on Fox Business with Cavuto on Coast to Coast. We had a great discussion about this. I was also on NTD News talking about this as well, how the Fitch downgrade of U.S. debt will influence you. And I'll be sure to put a link to the NTD News one anyway. Haven't been able to get the other one from the Fox News business yet, but I will whenever I'll be able to post that whenever I get it. But the key thing here for me is, so what they did was Fitch, one of these credit rating agencies, there's also Moody's and S&P, but Fitch is one of the key ones that are out there. They downgraded the U.S. debt from AAA to AA+. So basically, they gave them a little bit less than a perfect score. So it's not a huge change there, but it shows the indication of the future. And this is really what they said in their report, is that there's the lack of governance. There's the lack of trying to find a way to overcome some of our excessive spending and government debt ways because of the trajectory that we're on. And it's something I've talked a lot about, which is why I think we need a spending limit, not just a balanced budget amendment, but a spending limit that really puts the burden of government where it's at. And that's the only way to rein in government spending over time. But I think that's something that we really need to look at. And this is another example of that. I don't know if there needs to be a commission again or something, but we've got to put in place stronger restrictions on spending, or this will have an influence. And this will have an influence today, as we saw the stock market go down when this came up. Interest rates start going up as well. And then the Fed is probably going to have to print more money, as we've seen M2 come back over the last couple of months. So inflationary pressures are still there. And so this will influence the higher interest rates, your car loans, which are near multi-decade highs right now. Mortgage rates were multi-decade highs. And this is just another indication of that, of the major costs that are going on. So I think that this was a correct way to do it by Fitch. And it was also belated. I think it should have been done sooner because of the bipartisan problem of excessive government spending. So there's that issue. Another big issue on the state front has been about state and local tax revenues. When you look at tax revenues, year over year, they're down in Q1 of 2023 by 7.6%. And this is adjusted for inflation. But even if you look at not adjusted for inflation for in the Q1 2023, it was still down. This is the second most decline since 1948, next to only 2009. And we're likely to get another real decline in tax revenue, state and local tax revenue in Q2 2023 when those data come out. The year-over-year percent change has been declining each quarter since Q2 2022, or for 4 straight quarters, which will likely be 5 when Q2 23 data are reported. And that's also about the time when I think the recession, or at least a major slowdown, started in the economy. When you look at a lot of indicators, and another one of those is the tax revenue. Now, of course, it's hit or miss. I think in places like Texas, you're seeing it grow rapidly, but California, you're not, as people are moving to different places. But this is something, again, that we want to watch, and it's going to be important for tax reforms and everything else. And again, it goes back to the point that we need government spending restraint. We never have a tax revenue problem. We have a spending problem, and we've got to get that under control. There was another good chart out there, chart of the century by Mark J. Perry at AEI, American Enterprise Institute, that he comes out with every 6 months, which talks about or shows the price changes. And this shows from January 2000 as being the base period to June 2023, areas that have grown faster than inflation, like hospital services, college tuition and fees, college textbooks, medical care services, food and beverage, and housing. Those have all increased faster than inflation of 76% since January of 2000. And all those are dominated by what? By government. And so you have this infiltration by government in those sectors, in healthcare and education, and prices go up higher than otherwise. Whereas those areas that have more market-based forces, like the new cars, household furnishings, clothing, cell phone services, toys, computer services, TVs, those are all down well below inflation over that 23-year period. And many of them have actually been declining if you look at these data. And I'll put the link to this in the show notes page. So that's another effort of saying, look, government is the problem. And last but not least here, I had a piece, or at least an interview with KTRH News out of Houston. The wealthy are thriving under Biden, President Biden. The bottom line is my quote, the bottom line is the Biden policies are actually hurting those they are purport to help. Bidenomics has really been a situation where those with higher incomes continue to do well, but everyone else is going to take a hit. And unfortunately, that has been the case. And I think it'll continue to be the case with higher inflation, less economic growth, stagflationary period, if not recession, that we're in today. So with that happy note, I hope you have a wonderful weekend and continue to do great things. Please join me again and give me a 5-star rating. I would greatly appreciate that. And until next time, let people prosper.